Alright, so welcome back. In this video, we're now going to talk about where opinions actually come from, right? So, if what we're saying basically about the subconscious and subconscious forms, if it's all true and it's all based on the absolute nature that's determined by God, then why can people have different opinions? It should, from what I'm saying, in theory, it should be impossible, right? So, just go over this first point, which is basically a question. If things we observe can be good approximations of subconscious forms, and forms are absolute, right, determined by God, their configurations or arrangement patterns determined by God, and your subconscious activity is also determined by God, based on your intention, then where do opinions come from, right? So basically, if I say a joke, right, now a joke is actually an arrangement pattern. The ideal joke, or a really good joke, is an arrangement pattern that matches the subconscious form associated with laughter, right? So that arrangement pattern generally has the setup of a punchline and a setup and punchline, right? So if a joke is really good and it causes us to laugh, the reason that happens is because as we're observing or listening to the joke, right, due to the reflection principle, the joke has our intentions basically copying or reflecting the joke that we're hearing. Our intention basically does something fancy, right, that eventually causes our quantizes our subconscious to switch to the laughter frequency. And on that frequency, we feel the emotion of laughter, which is similar to humor, and we have the ability to transcendentally control our body to laugh. So if the joke, the better the joke is at matching the subconscious form associated with humor, the more it is going to inspire us to produce intention at the laughter frequency. So a good joke, the structure of a joke and what makes a joke good is determined, again, by God, right? But then, if that's true, why can some people hear a joke and laugh and some don't? Certain songs will have a subconscious form or an arrangement pattern, concrete and abstract, that when we listen to it, due to the reflection principle, we produce an intention that copies it, and that whatever our intention is expressing to copy it is going to cause our subconscious to go to some frequency, right? And if it goes to the proper frequency, we feel a certain emotion, right? And the more emotion we feel, the more moved or entertained we are by the song or the music. Why can some people listen to that music and feel strong emotions very powerfully, while some don't at all, right? And they may even feel different emotions, right? So how is all of this possible? Well, the reason has to do with this principle, which we didn't mention lately, so you might have forgotten about it, but this is still true, right? So just to go over this point, the subconscious can always be charged to alter your perception to perceive a subconscious form in anything. So before going on the rest of it, basically what I'm saying is that what we said before, so we said before, this was in chapter 3, that your your conscious mind or your negative mind can produce an intention, whatever produces an intention that causes your subconscious to switch to a certain frequency. But your intention can, you could produce intention in some way that causes your subconscious to charge up at a certain frequency. And we haven't really talked too much about subjects yet, but we'll talk more about that in chapter 9 and 10. But just know that when you incorporate the idea of a subject, that your subconscious you can use your intention to charge your subconscious to see a form in anything, even bad approximations of the form, right? So if let's take a bad joke, right? It's possible for me to charge my subconscious in such a way where the joke now sounds good, right? So if I just hold the intention to perceive this joke as good, right, then it'll charge up in a way that alters my perception to perceive the joke in a good way. And what it means is that my perception is altered to perceive the joke to have the subconscious form of laughter, even if it really didn't. And we actually talked about that with musicians, right? So when people are making music, they end up looping the song over and over again, and they keep holding the intention to perceive the song as good. So that's what ends up happening, right? And eventually their subconscious charges so much and alters their perception so much, right, that their sort of opinion or their reference frame for whether or not the song is good or not can no longer be trusted, because most other people aren't going to have that charge, right? And that's why a lot of musicians, although they made good music probably when they were younger at some point, a lot of times they make bad music when they get older, and it's because of that process. right? So in other words, the subconscious will still listen to you, right? If I see something that's a bad approximation of a form, like a bad joke, right, I can still hold the intention to perceive the joke as good anyway. It's not like my subconscious is just going to ignore me just because the joke is actually bad or isn't a good approximation of the subconscious form associated with laughter. And so, in fact, that's a process I call form morphing, right? So form morphing is basically when you have something you're observing in the real world, right? So let's say it's an object, or it could be a relationship, but let's say it's an object that you're observing, right? It has a natural configuration that matches some arrangement pattern or some subconscious form determined by God, right? But I can morph the way. Form morphing is probably not a terrible word because I'm not actually morphing a form, but it's probably a terrible term, but that's just what I end up calling it. But I can morph what form I perceive when I look at that object by using my intention and just charging my subconscious anyway. So before I go over some examples, going over this next point, it says, basically what I'm getting at here, just before I even read it, is that the degree to which some environment or relationship resembles a form will always be based on two parameters. The form morphing parameter, which is basically your opinion or your intention, the way your mind chose to charge your subconscious, and also the innate structure of the thing you're observing, which is the true part. So the form morphing part is the opinion, the way it actually looks in reality, irrespective of whatever you're thinking, is the truth part of it. So basically, opinion, the way something appears to you, or how much it looks like a subconscious form, and the degree to which it inspires you to produce a particular intention, is always based on those two parameters. So it's not just one, it's two, right? If it were just the one parameter, which is the degree to which or the arrangement pattern of something you're observing, how much it approximates a certain subconscious form, if it were just that, then it's true. There would be no such thing as opinions, and everyone would have absolutely the same response to the same things. But it's based on two parameters, the degree to which something looks like a subconscious form to you. So it's based on the way it's innately configured. That's the way that's determined by God. That has nothing to do with what you think or what you believe. So if it's configured in a certain way that matches or is a good approximation of a subconscious form, then it's going to cause you or inspire you to produce a certain intention. But the other thing that affects the degree to which you perceive a subconscious form is your opinion. It's basically the degree to which your intention has charged your subconscious to perceive some subject in a certain way. And that's kind of what we said before about how your pre-existing charge affects the degree to which you perceive something, right? So, like I said before, if you're in a bad mood, right, you might not be that receptive of jokes. Why? Because your mood represents that your subconscious is charged up on some negative frequency. That charge is altering your perception. That altered perception is making it harder for you to perceive the joke properly. But more specifically, in terms of what we discussed now, that altered perception is making it harder for you to perceive the subconscious form that's within the joke associated with the form related to laughter, right, as determined by God. So it's always going to be, again, those two parameters, your existing charge, or the way your intention is charged, your subconscious, and the innate structure of the thing being observed. So, just to go over this next point, the worse an approximation of some subconscious form that something is, the more intense the subconscious charge needs to be to perceive the form in a bad approximation anyway. And so in other words, what I'm saying there is that let's say something's a really bad approximation of a subconscious form, meaning that its innate structure is highly deviated from the structure that God said it has to have to cause you or to match this particular frequency, right? So for example, if I say a joke that's really, really, really bad, right? What makes a joke really bad is that it doesn't have the configuration or the arrangement pattern, concrete and abstract, to match the arrangement pattern that God said is associated with laughter, right? So if I put a set of words, so if I'm saying the words, if I'm acting it out or whatever, that represents a concrete and abstract arrangement pattern, right? And if I do it, arrange it in just the right way as you're listening to it, it'll properly fit the arrangement pattern God associated with laughter. But if I don't do it right, if I deviate from that arrangement pattern which God said, if I deviate a huge amount, then you're not going to land on the laughter frequency when you're reflecting what I'm doing through the reflection principle. So in other words, what I did was a bad approximation of the laughter frequency. So it was a bad joke. However, right, you can still charge your subconscious in such a way to perceive laughter from it anyway. Let's say you're charging your subconscious such that whatever I do, it makes you laugh, and which is possible. That is a subconscious charge you could do. But you would have, in order to still find my joke funny, you would have to charge it by a huge amount, right? So, but if you charge it enough, you will still see laughter in that bad joke. So even if something's a bad approximation of a subconscious form, you can still see the form within the bad approximation based on that second parameter, based on the subconscious charge. And it really is just what Socrates said, right? So the opinion part is the part that's kind of the lie. It's not true, right? So I can charge my subconscious to see a bad joke as being very, very moving, right? I could charge my subconscious, or charge my subconscious to see a bad joke as being very funny. I could charge my subconscious to see a peaceful song, right? So a song that stimulates your subconscious or stimulates you to feel the feeling of peace, right? Which is like meditation music, right? Those songs have the arrangement pattern, as determined by God, that matches the peace frequency, right? So things that are peaceful, right, will sound a certain way. They'll have a certain sound, right? And when my intention is reflecting something that has a sound associated with the frequency of peace, right, my intention will naturally cause my subconscious to switch to the frequency of peace, right? So meditation music causes us to feel the feeling of peace through the reflection principle. However, I can listen to music that sounds nothing like a peaceful frequency. So I can listen to like super hardcore, like metal, rock music or whatever, right? And I can charge my subconscious in a way to respond to that frequency by becoming more peaceful, right? Now, as you can see, that charge would be a lie, right? So the metal rock music is absolutely not associated with the peace frequency. But if I go deeper into my opinion, or just my conscious mind's thoughts and definitions and the way it chooses to charge things, I can still get peace from that frequency. But it wouldn't be the truth. So your subconscious, naturally, it favors truth. So what that means is that things that have an innate nature, right, or natural, things that have an arrangement pattern that naturally matches the certain frequency or subconscious form, right, the better approximation of it is of a subconscious form, the more it's going to inspire you to produce, intention that charges your subconscious at a certain frequency. It's going to inspire you to produce a form intention. What I'm really trying to say is that if something's a good approximation of a subconscious form, it's very easy for your subconscious to charge up at a frequency that matches that form. If something's a bad approximation of a subconscious form, it's very hard for you to charge up at a frequency that matches the subconscious form that's a bad approximation of, right? It would take you have to go out of your way, and you have to make a huge amount of effort, right? Which is charging through your conscious mind, but you have to make a huge amount of effort to perceive that form in a bad approximation anyway, right? If something's already a good approximation, it takes very little effort to perceive the subconscious form in a good approximation. So, in other words, your subconscious favors responses according to subconscious forms, or things that are good approximations of subconscious forms. So just to give some examples, if something's a good joke, right, it takes very little effort from you to laugh at the joke. Even if you're in a bad mood, you might still find it funny if it's a really good joke, right? And if you're not really in much of any mood at all, which is basically just you're in your subconscious ground state. So you're just in the state where your body's doing most of the charging. You would still find a joke funny, right, if it's a good joke, right? Because your subconscious favors good approximations of subconscious forms. It favors responses based on good approximations of forms, right? Not so much your subconscious charging your subconscious to see forms, right? And on the other hand, if you want to perceive a joke that's really bad, then you do have to go out of your way and have this crazy intense charge, which even that would be hard for you to do unless you're intentionally trying to do it. but you have to give a whole bunch of effort to still be able to laugh at a bad joke, right? So you can still perceive subconscious forms of bad approximations of it, but it takes a lot of effort to do that. Whereas having a subconscious response to something that's a good approximation of the form, it takes very little effort. It's natural to your subconscious. And then just to go over this last point, when something is a very good approximation of some subconscious form, most people's opinion will reflect that fact. Those who deviate will be considered an outlier. And so basically what I'm saying there is that, let me just sort of read that one more time. Do I want to talk about that right now? Yeah, I can talk about that. So, yeah, basically what I'm saying there is basically what I was saying before, that the subconscious favors responses based on the innate configuration pattern of the way something appears to you, which is the truth part. So most people, because of that tendency, right, if what I'm saying is true, right, then in any sort of opinion poll, let's just presume something's a good approximation. So we're going to assert that in a more axiomatic way. We're just assuming it's true, right? Let's assume that something's a good approximation of a subconscious form. Then you would most likely see most people's opinion be very similar about how observing that thing affected them, right? Because according to me, right, your subconscious favors responses based on the innate configuration pattern. It doesn't favor responses that much based on subconscious charge. It takes a lot of effort to charge your subconscious to have a certain response in things that are bad approximations of some form. So if I'm right, then most people's opinions should be the same, because most people wouldn't have the same charge, right? They wouldn't have this intense charge causing them to see some subconscious form in something that's a bad approximation of it. Most people would have all different kinds of charges. So the one thing that's going to be the same among most of them is this truth part. The fact that their subconscious is going to have a relatively innate or fixed response to some configuration pattern. And if you really take certain opinion polls, that's exactly what happens. So a good example of that is exactly what I was saying before about beauty, right? So where do different opinions come from in terms of things that are beautiful? Well, they come from this exact process, right? I can charge my subconscious to perceive beauty in something that isn't, right? Like terrible music, right? If music has a very ugly, non-beautiful format, right? I can still charge my subconscious to see it as beautiful. But most people aren't going to have that charge. All people have the same innate absolute response. So if music is beautiful, most people tend to agree just to a good amount that it's beautiful, right? You'll probably see, like, if music is really, like, probably music that I think is the most beautiful music I've ever heard, right? And I don't think it's close, if I'm being honest. Is this, it's like this compositional pattern. I think it's called Canon in D, right, by Pachelbel or something. I don't know. I think it's generally attributed to the musician is it Pachelbel? I'd have to look it up. It's something. I remember that, but I don't even know if that's true. But I know the song, the arrangement pattern is generally called Canon in D, right, which is an amazing song. If it's played on piano or if it's I don't know if I've heard it played on guitar, but if it's played on piano or violin, it sounds amazing. So beautiful, right? Now that compositional pattern approximates the subconscious form beauty. And when most people will hear it, let's say for the first time, most people would agree that that song is beautiful, right? Now, why do they all do that? Because it actually has the innate sort of pattern of beauty. Most people, you're not going to see maybe like 10% of people agree that it's beautiful and everyone else agrees it's ugly. Then if you go to this culture or this culture, it's all over. Like, no, most people, when they hear it, they're just going to agree that it's a beautiful song. Now, they might disagree on how beautiful it is, but most people will agree that it's beautiful, right? If you see like an attractive chick, right, not to get too sort of crass, but if you see a girl who looks really, really beautiful, right, most people will agree that she's pretty, right? Like Alicia Keys, right, or Beyonce, right? I remember at one point I used to think like Beyonce was like the most beautiful girl to ever exist, right? But most people will look at her and say, yeah, she's pretty, right? There will be some outliers who may disagree. That's going to be generally, according to this theory, that's going to be based on some pre-existing charge that they have. Maybe they don't like girls that look like her or act like her or something like that, and that's distorting their perception. That happens too, right? But most people's opinion will generally be the same. The same thing is true. We're going to talk about morality. I think we'll talk about morality in the next video, right? Where people think certain things are wrong or they're moral, right? Most people agree on what's right based on this principle. But we're going to talk a little bit about morality later. But anyway, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But yeah, that's where basically opinions come from. Opinions are the result of the subconscious just charging your conscious mind, charging your subconscious to perceive something you're observing in the real world, perceive it in a way where it looks like a subconscious form. So exactly what we said about the cloud. So if I look at a cloud, I might not see anything, right? But I could charge my subconscious to see some animal. The animal represents a form, right? So I could charge my subconscious to see an animal. My subconscious alters my perception. Now I see it. The cloud may not have had an innate structure that strongly resembled the animal, but I can always form morph it or morph the form in a way that makes it look like the subconscious form associated with some animal, right? So it'll always be based on those two parameters. How the degree to which you perceive a form in reality will always be based on these two parameters: the truth and the opinion. I don't think we did relationships very much. So as another example, let's say I take two. Well, we kind of did it in the previous video though. But let's say I take two friends, right? I could take two people who are ostensibly friends, but they're really not because they're very mean to each other, right? I could charge my subconscious to see them as friends anyway. Some people actually do that, right? So if they're in a friend group, right, and they're kind of ostensibly friends through the friend group, but they don't get along that well, they might still call themselves friends, but what they're doing is charging the intention to see themselves as friends. But the actual parameters of their relationship don't properly approximate the friend frequency, which is why they feel so much clashing, right? There is something a little bit more to say about this. I think we'll talk about it in the next video. Because what I was going to say is if you're charging your subconscious to feel some emotion on the basis of form morphing, not necessarily on the basis of it having a proper innate structure, you can still feel the subconscious frequency associated with that form, but you won't feel it very purely, right? So if I take a bad joke, right, and I charge my subconscious to see it's funny, I'll still feel the laughter, the emotion of laughter and humor, and I'll be on my subconscious switch to that frequency. But it's not going to be very pure because the frequency isn't innate. It's like I'm trying to force it, right? And so when the frequency is very pure, it comes in stronger and more naturally and more purely. And my subconscious reflects that frequency more purely. So, but we're going to talk about that principle more in the context of morality because that's important. I think it's more important to talk about it in that case. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Actually, so I actually was going to end the video, but I forgot. There was one thing I just remembered that I did want to talk about that I don't know why I forgot to mention it. But just going more into entertainment, right? So let's say we're looking at a movie, or we're thinking about a movie, right? Most people, just looking at this last point, most people will agree that a movie is good, right? If it a movie is a story, right? So it's a continuous procession of scenes, right, that have certain context. Now, if through the reflection principle, if each one of those scenes properly approximates some subconscious form related to that scene, and it could be related to concepts like adventure or heroism or romance or danger to stimulate the danger frequency, things like that. So the context you would perceive through the reflection principle in movies would generally be related to abstract ideas like that, but all those ideas still have a subconscious form. The idea of adventure still has a subconscious form, and it has a certain arrangement pattern of characters or plots or stories, things like that, that will, when your intention produces, both concrete and abstract, will cause your subconscious to charge up at what you might call the adventure frequency. So you have the feeling of adventure, and you're able to perceive or apply in relationships associated with adventure. So if the movie continuously has scene after scene after scene that properly represents a subconscious form, your subconscious is constantly going to charge, or it's going to favor the act of charging. It's going to be very easy for it to charge up. And if the movie does that the whole movie, right, you're going to feel very emotionally stimulated the whole movie. And then you're going to say it was a good movie, right? Because entertainment is determined by how much emotion you feel. That's how we basically described it there before, or how much your subconscious charges during some activity. So when movies are considered to be very, very good, what do we see? We see most opinions will say, yeah, it was pretty good, right? Because of this same principle. There will be an outlier of some who say, oh no, it was bad. Like, I remember I was reading this review on Rotten Tomatoes of The Dark Knight, right? It was the dumbest review I probably ever read, because it was saying how Dark Knight wasn't that great, and it said it wasn't that great basically because everyone else was saying that it was so good. What kind of stupid review is that? How could you say that, right? In other words, they're saying it's not good because they're referencing other people's opinion in order to determine how good it is. What sense does that make? In other words, they want to be contrarian, right? Their goal is to be contrarian. I'm saying it's not good just because everyone else said it was bad. So what does that represent? Exactly what I said. It represents how the pre-existing charge or form morphing, your conscious mind just charging your subconscious in some way it feels like, right? Altering your perception of how well you perceive the innate form, right? So if it morphs the form. So in other words, because he wanted to be different from everyone else, he didn't enjoy the movie as much. But most people, right, won't have a charge like that. So the majority of people will perceive the movie as good, and that's exactly what you see. That's what you see with pretty much movies that are good, games that are good, songs that are good, all kinds of things, right? If a fight is pretty good in boxing, right, a lot of people will agree because it has an innate structure in the scene after scene after scene, or, moment after moment after moment in the fight, that match approximates a good subconscious form. So basically this last idea sort of lends itself to exactly what I'm saying, right? That things can be arranged in nature that things can be arranged in nature that are good, that can be good approximations of subconscious forms. And when they are, most people will have a much easier time charging the subconscious according to that good approximation, right? And they'll generally agree on how the thing they observed made them feel. So their opinion will generally be the same, but you will have some outliers, right? And so opinions, basically there's always, when it comes to the way something appears to us, there's generally a truth aspect of it, which is exactly what Socrates said, and that represents this innate structure that's determined by God. And then there will be a kind of, I want to call it a lie, but there will be a aspect of it that isn't based on truth, right? That's just based on what we feel, or custom is sometimes also called in philosophy. But then that's the opinion part, right? So yeah, I thought that was important enough to mention. I just wanted to mention it here. But yeah, next video we'll talk about, next video I think we're going to talk about morality, right? So we're going to talk about morality, talking about these same principles and that concept, and those terms. And that'll kind of set things up for chapter 3 of book 2 when we start talking about spirituality and connecting to God. All right, so yeah, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.